already familiar with the Spectrum E software that are on this call. So just very quick intro. Let's go over who we are, what we do. We're spectrum management specialists. We focus on the resale of our commercial off-the-shelf software product, Spectrum E, for spectrum management, spectrum engineering. We offer our products in a software as a service subscription model, as well as perpetual or permanent licensing model. Obviously, the two have their own advantages. Subscription-based as a economic advantage, perpetual licensing. There's some other advantages as well to paying one time and not having to constantly renew your license. Maintenance fees are rolled into the subscription model, whereas maintenance fees after the first year are optional. With the perpetual license model. You'd have to choose to renew your maintenance service. And the maintenance service includes access to product updates, upgrades, bug fixes, technical support, things like this. So we also provide enterprise solutions and related asset building services, leveraging modified off-the-shelf implementations of adapted versions of Spectrum E. And we provide professional services. We hold a GSA multiple award schedule with the U.S. federal government, and that includes the provision of subject matter expertise consultation, measurement drive testing and coverage reporting, GIS data conversion, and custom software development. Our web application is known as Spectrum E. Spectrum E is composed of three principal modules: e-licensing, technical analysis, and remote monitoring. Today's session will focus on a particular feature of the technical analysis module. This platform includes an online portal that allows end users to access centralized spectrum management data either through a private network or over an internet portal. So today we're going to focus on a particular feature it's relatively new that we've included in the technical analysis module of Spectrum E, and that is the automatic placement of relays. So there's some prerequisites to executing this feature. So we're going to go over some of those prerequisites right now. So you have them listed out here, and we're going to go over one by one. So obviously you need digital terrain and clutter information. So this is included with the Spectrum E software. There's 30-meter digital terrain data for the entire planet. We generally use SRTM or the USGS 3DEP in the case of the US territories and contiguous states. And that's giving us contiguous coverage over the entire planet. We also have clutter data that's included with Spectrum E for the entire planet from multiple sources. We've listed here the National Land Cover Dataset from the USGS, Korean Land Cover, Landsat multispectral satellite photographs. All that is used to create a global clutter model, which we'll highlight during the product demo, but I think many people are familiar with that. So obviously you need GIS data to begin doing these types of simulations in Spectrum E. You log in, you have 30-meter data for everything, and in some cases you have higher fidelity data, such as 1 meter, what we call high resolution LiDAR quality data. And that's mostly in the US, but we're extending that into Europe a little more. You also need the ability, so that's the terrain. This is an example of the clutter. So you can see there's color representations of different types of aggregate areas. So green is representing forested vegetative areas. You've got red here that represents like populated urban areas. You've got other colors such as blue that might represent water, or these different tan or kind of yellow colors that represent either rural areas or deserted areas. I think this particular screenshot is an area in Africa. It's in Kenya, actually. So one thing you'll be able to notice if we go back here is that you have two nodes here that are placed on the map, and you've got a big mountain range. So this is going to be the example that we're going to use in today's demonstration, is how to identify relay to connect these two nodes, which you can kind of tell that they're probably obstructed by this mountain ridge. So we have the GIS data that we need to use. Obviously, we've placed two nodes, as you can see on the map. Those objects, they include the technical parameters of the transmit stations that need to communicate with each other, or the trans-receive stations, we could say. So the ability to create objects on a digital map is obviously important to be able to accomplish this analysis. Here you have a map layer representation, which makes it a little more clear what the issue is. You also have to be able to calculate a point-to-point path profile. So the tool has to be able to calculate free space loss, as well as propagation losses, path loss over a path. So here in this is the profile view of Spectrum E. You've got a little legend at the bottom that describes what all these lines and the colored regions represent. So the gray area here is the terrain. The profile is going left to right. So the transmit point is the furthermost left point, and the receive is the position on the right, and the y-axis is representing elevation above sea level. The x-axis is representing the distance of the path. So it's about a 31-kilometer path between those two nodes. The blue line represents the line of sight between the 2 points, and then the blue ellipse, you can see a slight ellipse, it's the frontal zone. The green curve is the path loss, and as you can see, when it encounters an obstruction, it dips down. The red curve is the free space loss, so that's loss just over free space over flat Earth. And you have some readouts here at the top along this black line. This black line changes dynamically as the user moves their cursor. We'll highlight that during the demonstration. And it reads out the free space loss, the distance from the origin point to elevation above sea level of the terrain, as well as the path loss. I think the B is representing path loss. The F here, LBF, represents the free space loss. So you'll see there's a deviation between the free space loss and the path loss at this point when this obstruction blocks the line of sight. So you have much more significant path loss due to diffraction. So that's, of course, important. So you have to be able to do all those calculations in the tool. And there is something additional here. And this is something we call downlink overlap count analysis. So it's a point to area analysis. This is distinct from the point to point analysis because, yes, while we do need to be able to look at a point to point calculation between the two nodes that we wish to connect to each other, we want to find potential relay locations. So we're doing a point to area analysis to identify where there's line of sight overlap in the coverage calculations between the two nodes. So basically what we've done is we've run line of sight coverage for node A and node B, and we've done an overlap count for the coverage. So it's filtered the coverage into two colors. Orange is representing where only one node, one station is offering line of sight coverage, and green is representing where you have the overlap coverage between the two stations. So basically all the green dots here, all the green areas, I should say, in the pixelated areas, these represent where a potential relay could be placed. So the goal of the auto relay placement function will be to identify what is the best location to place the relay of all the green areas here in this downlink overlap count coverage result. So those are the functions that we need to be able to execute the auto relay placement. So how does the auto relay placement feature actually work? Well, it's going to want to find by default the shortest distance between nodes. So we'll look at this here. So the first criteria is the shortest distance between two nodes. So it's going to look at all the green pixels here, and it's going to say which is the one that has the shortest A1 plus A2. And this is what we mean by A1. A1 is the path from node A to one of the pixels in the green area, and A2 is from node B to that same pixel. So it's going to sum this distance for between node A and node B for every green dot in this downlink overlap count coverage result. And it's going to take the lowest value. It's going to say, okay, that's the best location to put the relay. So that's the main criteria. But obviously, there can be environmental constraints that may make it difficult. Maybe the shortest distance, the shortest A1 plus A2 value is while technically there's a line of sight overlap between the 2 points, it could be on a place that's very unrealistic, maybe to put a relay. It could be on the side of a ridge that you can't really get to, or something. And so you do have an ability to apply something we call a margin. This location margin is working in the following way. So here I have an example of two potential relay locations. One is entered at with a 0 margin, and the other one with a 1 margin. This is the location margin field in the add relay function box you see on the left. So that's where you define your margin in this field. So we can see both of these red relay points. They're inside the green pixels, so that's fine. But where I put 0 in the location margin, what it's done is it hasn't bothered to put a margin around that pixel location. So it just found the best pixel that can meet the shortest distance between two nodes criteria that has a line of sight coverage overlap between node A and node B. But there can be, it's just a simulation. There can be errors. Maybe there's a mistake. The terrain may be flawed or whatever. There can be other environmental constraints as well as to would preclude this from really being the best position. So you can add this margin. And if in this case, I add a 1 pixel margin. So what it's doing is extending the requirement by 1 pixel. It's also going north, but I just didn't make the screenshot large enough to go north. But all around that potential relay location by 1 pixel to then pick the next best location that covers that additional criteria. So it's the shortest distance between two nodes with a 1 pixel margin. And you can increase that margin 2 and so forth, 3, and to get multiple candidate locations. So here's an example where I've done this analysis. So I've got 0 and 1, which are right next to each other. And so those are two potential, but then I did 2 pixels and I found another location. So the relay location that is the shortest distance between two nodes and has a 2 pixel margin is out here further north on another ridge. And so maybe that might be the one that would actually serve as the best relay location. So at least this way you have multiple candidates to pick from, and you have a sensible criteria to apply for picking these candidate locations. So that's basically the sum of what we're going to show today. I'm going to go ahead and begin the product demonstration portion of the presentation today. So I'm going to go to spectrum.center, and I have my login criteria credentials already set up. So I'm going to go in, and I'm using the unlimited version of Spectrum. So I have a lot of features here that some of you may not be familiar with. Don't worry about it. We're not going to cover all of that. The main thing we're going to cover are the technical analysis features, and that's basically covered by the network and map tabs. Some of you may already be familiar with that. So I'm going to go to the map tab quickly. As you can see, I have a coverage of the entire planet here. I can scroll around. I have no particular limitation. I can zoom in and out. And as mentioned before, we have terrain and clutter for the whole planet. So I go to terrain here, and I have 30-meter terrain for the whole planet. I can move around, move up, down, north, south. So there's no limitations there. If you're working in a particularly unique part of the planet, let's say you're working in the Pacific Ocean area, or you need to do analysis in this particular view, you can do that. There's no restriction there. Also, we have clutter data. I'll move over to the clutter. And the nice thing about Spectrum E, as you may notice, is I don't have to do any map data manipulation. I don't have to convert data anywhere. I don't have to manipulate it, do this. It's all preloaded and ready to use. As you can see, as I zoom in, the clutter quality gets a little more refined, a little better. So here we go. I have this clutter data in Africa is not bad. We can also go to the US, and we're constantly improving the clutter information. So as you zoom in, you'll see the clutter data gets a little more detailed. So here we go, US, this is the USGS 3DEP. And one thing about, at least in the US, is if you zoom in enough, you'll notice, and we switch back to the terrain view, you have some nice LiDAR data. This is the building heights data, and this is mostly US. A lot of major cities you have if you go down to zoom level 15, you'll start to see this LiDAR data pop up in a lot of the major cities. So we've been populating that in the US. We're starting to work on Europe little by little. And as this type of data becomes more publicly available, we'll start to populate that into Spectrum as part of the off-the-shelf product. Um, and it's just an advantage that our customers have. They get access to higher quality data as we make it available as part of the commercial product. If you do want to use your own data, your own custom data, we can do that. That's no problem. There are ways to import your own custom data into the tool. You can acquire it from another source, and you can either share it with the public Spectrum e-server, or you can have it private. And it could be your own private data set that only you use and no one else can. And of course, you can always elect the option to do a local on-premise install if you have the unlimited version. So we're going to go into this particular scenario so that's the first criteria. We've got to terrain and clutter. We're going to go at this particular scenario in Kenya. So if I look into the objects here, I can see that I have my objects created. It's very simple. For example, I have the coordinates, I've got antenna height, I've got a power, I've got a frequency, and that's all I really need for this particular analysis. I don't need to go much further. We're not going into antennas or anything like that. So this is the issue. So as you can see quite clearly, there is a ridge in between these two nodes. So we're going to go ahead and do a path profile just to highlight that point. This is what we covered in the PowerPoint, but now we're actually going to execute the calculation. So just as we saw in the PowerPoint, I used the 1812 model for this calculation, but I can use multiple models if I wish. As I move my cursor over the profile, the information about the transmission loss or the path loss, the free space loss, elevation, distance, this all changes as I move my cursor across the profile. So obviously I have no line of sight. There's a big mountain ridge blocking. You can see the transmission or path loss dips down really low and it's very weak at the end. You have a full link budget that reads out at the bottom. So you can read the total losses, do the propagation calculation, the free space losses, the distance of the link. And you can see that the total losses are exceeding the free space loss. And at the end of the power received, I'm getting negative 146.95 dBm. So that's not going to work, obviously. I don't have a connection. So that's fairly obvious. And as mentioned before, you can toggle between different models. We have a few different available. You can pick different ones and do different types of calculations. And we cover that in the training. Every time you pick a different model and let's say you do a calculation, it opens in a different tab, the corresponding results. So you can keep multiple calculations open in different tabs for purposes of comparison. So we're going to close that. So we know the issue. The issue is that we don't have free space loss. So, I mean, we don't have line of sight between the two nodes. So the first step that I need to do is I need to execute a coverage calculation. So we're going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and run a 1812. So I can do it a few different ways. I'm going to just do a quick 1812 coverage calculation. I've got some default parameters set up. One thing that's nice is I've assigned some clutter heights to my clutter data. So you have this clutter height section where you can apply. There's some default settings that I can use, and I'm going to use them. I can also overwrite them. So I'm going to run them for the two objects. I believe I selected them, or if I didn't, I'll just click all objects to make sure I select them. And I'm going to leave it at one. For now, just leave it 10 meter receive height for the relay, potential relay location. And then we're going to go ahead and run the coverage. And you can see I'm distributing the computation amongst multiple cores, processor cores. And I could use different models. I don't have to use 1812. I just like to use it because it's pretty modern and it's pretty quick. So now that it's performed the path loss calculation, it's stored that in the path loss column here. So that's the summary of the calculation. Once you've done that once, you don't have to repeat it unless you want to with a different model or with different settings. So I can now output that to different types of results. I can do a heat map just to show the power received or field strength received coverage. I can do power flux density, but one I'm actually most interested in is this one, the downlink overlap count. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to call it downlink overlap. We're going to say, let's say neg 100. Be the threshold. We use dBm as the unit. We're not going to bother with any gain. We're going to go all objects. So it should be done with the calculation, and here we go. So it's very similar to what you saw in the PowerPoint. You have an orange where there's coverage from one node, and then in green where there's overlap between two nodes. So if I move my cursor over any of these green pixels, I'm going to see at the bottom it says 2. It means 2 servers, 2 nodes, 2 objects have coverage on the green dot. If I move over to the orange at the bottom here, it'll say 1. So that's a particular result. It can be filtered and customized here. You can go more than one. For example, I just did with 2, but if let's say I had 5 stations and I wanted to do the same analysis where there's overlap between up to 5, I can create a whole new palette and I can do a new one. I can say, we call these dot palettes, and I could put 5 entries and I could do downlink overlap count 5 station. Just an example. So then here we go. I'd have 5. And then here I would assign my colors, and I would say, okay, let's say this would be 1 station, 2 stations, 3 stations, 4 stations, 5 stations. So you have this nice kind of very flexible type of customization capability to repeat this analysis under different types of criteria. And just give different colors here. Click on the color picker, and then let's say one station would be, I don't know, say red, then it'll say orange, say yellow, maybe like blue, and then green, something like that. Here's the same thing. Since I only have 2 stations, I'm never getting past the orange, right? So that's to be expected. If I had multiple nodes and they had overlap, then I would maybe have more stations that I would cover, more colors. But I can, and now it's another save palette, and I can toggle between my 2 palettes here. Save here again. Okay, so I like my 2 station palette, that's fine. So this is just to highlight that there's no particular limitation. I could have done this a more complex scenario. It's no problem. So let's go ahead and let's find the relay location. So we've got all the prerequisites covered. We've done the main analysis. We've got the overlap count map. Now we want to use the uplink. The add relay function. So I got to select the 2 nodes of interest and click on add relay. So remember, we have the margin that we can enter. I'm going to start with 0. And we're going to do it downlink overlap. That's the simulation result that I want to use as my filtering criteria. So we're going to go ahead and click process, and it's found the relay. Great. So we're going to go ahead and map that location. And that's kind of what I thought. We zoom in. It's like in the PowerPoint. You can see there's no margin around this guy. So if, let's say, there's an error in the elevation model, maybe I don't really have line of sight or coverage between those 2 nodes at this particular location, I'd be taking a little bit of a risk assuming that this is going to be totally correct. So I can create multiple candidates. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to label this guy 0. Oops. And I'm going to do again the same analysis and maybe make like 2 or 3 more candidate locations. We'll do with a 1 margin. So let's edit him. Let's give it a name. Say 1 second. Find him easily, and we can map him. He's not that far apart, but it's got a little bit more of a margin as described in the PowerPoint. So this might be a little bit more of a secure location, but it's not that different. They're very close to each other. So this general area seems like probably good criteria where a relay could be placed, provided there's no additional environmental constraints, like there's a road and people can get to that point on the ridge, things like that. But again, you can always increase the criteria even more just to be more on the safe side. So let's say we'll up this to 2. There we go. We'll go ahead and add a label there. Now this time, you'll notice it's picked a totally different location on the ridge, and this is with the 2-pixel criteria, so it's a much bigger spot. And you can continue to do this analysis to find as many potential candidates as you see fit, and you can maybe overlap this with the road network to make sure that there are actually roads to get to these potential relay locations. So you can continue to add additional environmental constraints to the analysis to give you the best possible filtering of potential locations. And yeah, that's how you do the auto relay placement. And one last step, so I can go ahead and do a profile, for example, and just see, do I have the line of sight? That would be the last validation. So yep, I sure do. I do between the relay and node A. That's working well. And the relay and node B. So this was the 0-pixel relay, but that one seems to work. And same with, so this is going from node B to the relay location, 0. So I've got line of sight. So that's good. That's what I would have expected. And so it's working well in that particular location. But sometimes you can have some issues where maybe the line of sight's just very slight and a little risky.